So welcome to Rges Pre-Algebra Lesson 12A. We're beginning a new unit today, and this is an introduction to algebra. So we'll begin with a lot of terminology. First off, we need to deal with the symbol x. The symbol x in arithmetic has always meant to multiply, but now when you get to algebra, you use variables. Variables are letters that are used to represent a value or a number. And the value that's represented never changes within a single expression or equation. So if I had something like 2x plus 7x, and then I said x equals 3, I would have to plug that same value in both there and there. And then the next time maybe I want the same relationship, and then x would equal 5. And I would have to plug in a 5 both there and there. And because x is a letter, and it also is one of the letters most commonly used in algebra, we do not want x to represent multiply anymore. So we're going to talk about several other ways we can represent the idea of multiplication. So I could say 3 times a times x. This would be two different variables, and a constant or a number. And I'm using this dot, this raised dot, to represent multiply. That's one way I could do it. I could also say 3, and you put parentheses right next to each other without a sign. Without a sign there or there. So just hugging next to a number or hugging next to another parentheses. And when parentheses are used that way, it also means multiply. And then finally, if there are letters next to each other, we don't even need that. We could just take the number and write the letters right next to it. And that also means 3 times a times x. So 3 ideas: a raised dot, parentheses, or the value by itself, or written just next to each other like that. Now obviously if they were two numbers, like 3 times 8, I could write them this way, but I could not write that this way, because that would mean 38 and not 3 times 8. So you you use this last one when you're dealing with variables or one number and a variable. So that's our first idea. Do not use x when you're doing algebra. We do not use x to mean multiply. We use raised dots, or we use parentheses, or we simply write letters and a single number next to each other. So if I have something like 7 times x times y squared, I would just write it that way. Okay. Now the next idea we want to talk about is the idea of terms. In algebra, one of the big skills is to learn to recognize how many terms we have in an expression. And whenever we write a number and being multiplied, or a number being divided, there's an x times a y divided by 3, or a number, let's say 7x squared. These are, this is an expression in algebra, and terms are going to be separated by a plus or a minus sign. Minus 3. It could just be a number. Okay. So when we have terms, we have, this is term 1, term 2, term 3, and term 4. And you just want to recognize how many terms there are. We'll practice this as we look at them. Now, so this is 4 terms. If there are greater than 3 terms, we're going to call it a polynomial. And I could be more specific and say that this is a 4-term polynomial. If there are 3 terms, it would be a trinomial, like tricycle. 2 terms would be a binomial, like a bicycle. And 1 term would be called a monomial, like mono, meaning 1. Okay, monomial. So in one section here, they have you identify if this is going to be a trinomial, a binomial, or a monomial, or polynomial with greater than 3 terms. We also talk about just understanding how in the world to take a phrase in English and translate it into an algebraic expression. For instance, I could say, first off, let's talk about vocabulary words you would want to know. Sum is the answer to an addition problem. Quotient is the answer to a division problem. Product is the answer to a multiplication problem. And what am I missing? Difference is the answer to a subtraction problem. So make sure you know these 4 vocabulary words. Very important for algebra. Okay, so let's take a look at a few of these. It says things like 1 less than 2/3 times y. Well, I'll start with 2/3 times y. I could put times y, or I don't need to because it's sitting right next to a number, so I could just put 2/3 y, and 1 less would mean to subtract 1. If I said x minus y, I would simply write it that way. If I said 3 less than y, I would start with y and I would take 3 away. If I said 4 more than 5 times a, I would add 4, or I would tend to start with the 5 times a. I could write 5 times a, or I could write 5a, and 4 more would be to add 4. So usually you start with something and you're taking away, taking 3 less, or you're adding 4 more, something like that. Okay, so work on those yourself. When we talk about coefficients, coefficient means, well, let's see, factors are multipliers, right? So if we have 3 numbers multiplied together, let's say 3ab. 3ab. There we go. My 3 factors are 3a and b. I could talk about my numerical factors, which are the number parts, and I could talk about my letter factors, which I would call the literal. I would call these literal coefficients, both a and b, and I would call my 3 a numerical coefficient. If I have no numerical coefficient, let's say it's just x times y squared, I have no number I'm multiplying, so my numerical coefficient would be equal to 1. Why 1 and not 0? Because 1 times a value, okay, let's say 1 times 3, is the same as the value I started with, the 3. But 0 times 3 is 0. So we don't want that. I don't want to say the numerical coefficient up here would be 0, because then it would delete the term. But I would say it's 1, because 1 times all this is the same as all of that without the 1. Okay. That equals that. All right? Do the rest on your own, and we'll talk about the answers as we're together and see what you can think about there. Let's talk now about exponents. Exponents. Exponents is fast addition. Fast multiplication. Multiplication is fast addition. What do I mean by that? Let's say I have 4 plus 4 plus, that's a 4, believe it or not, 4 plus 4. Okay. That would be the same as 3 times 4. So multiplication is a fast way to express addition. Now, what if I had 4 times 4 times 4? I could express that as an exponent. How many times am I multiplying the same number over and over again? And that would be 3 times. So multiplication we could think of as fast addition or abbreviated addition. Fast meaning I'm just memorizing my facts, so I can do it quicker than just adding them all up. And then powers is the same as a fast multiplication. Okay. So if I had something, let's say I had 3 squared. This is called my base, and it represents what number I'm going to multiply over and over again. And this number or variable, if I'm in algebra, this is my exponent, and it represents how many times I'm going to multiply it over and over again. And altogether, that's called the power. What is the second power of 3? That would be 3 times 3, or 3 times 3 is 9. So let's look at some more ideas here with powers. First off, I can condense it, meaning let's write it in its simplest form. If I have something like this, how would I write this in simplest form? Well, I'll take my first value, which is a 2, and I'm going to multiply it together 2 times. So that's the same as 2 squared. I'm going to take my second value, which is an x, and I'm multiplying it by itself 1, 2, 3 times. So that's the same as x cubed. And I would take my next value, which is a y, and I'm multiplying it together by itself. In other words, the same value over and over, y times y times y times y, that's y to the 4th. Now, typically, the number part you would simplify. What is 2 times 2? 4. Okay, or I could have simplified it up here also. And so I would write that in its simplest form is written like that. That would be 4x cubed y to the 4th. And so you should be able to do this section when they're asking solving the numerical coefficient. That means once you've simplified, go ahead and write and do the computation for the numerical part. So let me give you another example. What if I have 6 times 6 times 6 times 6 times x times x times y. How would I simplify that? And I would take this in pairs. I'm going to multiply this out. That would be 36 times 36, and I would write x squared y when I'm done to simplify this part. So really the variable part is very easy. The number part might be a little trickier. 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 3 is 18, 21. 3 times 6 is 18, 9, and 10. And so my answer would be 1296. And so this simplifies to this. Go ahead and try the rest of them on your own, and we'll discuss anything you're confused on when you get back to class on Wednesday.